Okay, we're back.
We're back. Hello, hello.
Hi. We've been away for a little bit, but we're back.
Yeah, so this is our Friday, February 17th footnote. And we do footnotes every other week. This is an audio broadcast typically reserved for our patrons and our donors. We may make this one public, though, because I've been dealing with other things and haven't been able to produce
as
a
much
lot.
other things, yeah.
So in order to keep everybody engaged, we may have to make this one public.
Okay. So what's been going on lately has been some kind of crazy stuff going on. Do you want to talk about the flying objects and then talk about our other subject?
Right. My position on the flying objects, whether it's the Chinese space balloon
Or spy balloon, as
Chinese
they called it.
spy balloon, yeah, which we didn't even know about. Someone had to actually tell
I
us.
saw it. I was in a bar and I saw it on the Fox. They had Fox News on the TV, and I looked up and they were talking about it. I came back and told you about it, and they were talking about it from the standpoint of why isn't the military doing something about this? And
I thought Bridget was the first one to tell us about it.
No, she when we talked to her, she knew about it, but
Yeah, because she's like, and about the Chinese spy balloon, and I'm like, the wada.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
Maybe I was looking at the TV while they were visiting, but
Yeah. 'Cause
Anyway.
the first time I had ever heard about it is when we were in Mississippi last week, and she turned to me and she started going on and on about it, and I was like, I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, it's funny because like usually you're hip to stuff long
Right.
before I am, and you
Right.
tell me about it, and I didn't get a chance to tell you about it yet. I had seen it when I went up to get some drinks at the bar, and it had it on the TV screen. And like I said, it was Fox, and they have the closed captions, so I could see what they were talking about. But I loved that meme that was going around about the the balloon. It was like a
With
little
the
toy,
Chinese food container.
yeah, the Chinese food container attached to a helium toy balloon.
Right.
That was pretty funny.
So since then, there have been 2 or 3 other objects that were forced to be shot down by our brave military.
Oh yeah.
And they closed down the Montana airspace for a little while, and then they reopened it really quickly after that. What was that?
That was a notification on yet another phone
Wow,
in our
okay.
house. Yeah.
So the reality of it is that everybody's looking up. They want everyone to look up at these nonsensical stories that don't exist. I mean, these really cartoonish, fabricated stories, rather than looking on the ground at the real story. And the real story is what we've already covered, and what many people who are far more involved in covering this than we are, which is that, the entire COVID operation is a military operation from beginning to end. And whether you're talking about something being called a virus or whether you're talking about something being called a vaccine, it's a military operation from beginning to end, and there are multiple people that are complicit in war crimes against the innocent population, and all of this stuff that they're claiming is going on in the air is to distract people from the fact that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have been left dead or disabled as a result of biowarfare.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's really the bottom line. And our military is complicit. Obviously, the pharmaceutical companies are complicit. Obviously, the tech, sector is complicit. Obviously, the governments are complicit. Like, everybody is working in tandem to wage chemical and biological and radiological and probably even in some cases nuclear warfare on the general population. So that's
Exactly.
that's what's going on. And so this stuff going on in the air is garbage. Like it's just all theater.
It's funny. Well, I was looking at Twitter because I get these email feeds, right, of like, hey, look what you've been, look what's going on your feed and Twitter, and people I don't even know. It's like it comes across, but some guy was like, look, they're even, sarcastically, they're even attacking the Wawa, and he was looking, it was an image, it was a video of up above a Wawa store. For those of you on the West Coast, Wawa is a convenience
Isn't
store.
it a gas station?
No, it's like a convenience store.
Is
They
it?
might have gas station. They might have gas associated with some of them, but the ones that I've gone into are mostly just convenience stores. Anyway, and he like raised his phone camera, his camera phone up, and like past the moon there were like these two white objects, and some guy was like, look, they're even attacking the Wawa now. And then some woman replied to him and said, it's as if they're doing this to distract us from something. Remember? And what did you say to her?
I basically just gave her a video. I said, you think? And then I just gave her war crimes.
Right.
The video that I made.
Right.
War crimes.
Yeah. Right. So and so we're not the only ones that are speculating that this is, or saying that this is, a way of distracting us from something. And when we know what it is, she just was like going to her intuitive place.
Right. And she may have been like sarcastic, when she was saying that in Twitter, because if you read through the threads, it's clear that she's aware of what's really going on. But anyway, the whole thing about everything.
The whole thing about everything.
The whole thing about everything about life right now is that, we're in the midst of World War III, and it's hybrid war, kinetic war. It's fifth, what did I call it? It's asymmetrical war. And so it's going to look a lot different than than your typical hot war.
Well, is it like is it like a plug-in hybrid war?
Very funny.
Well, because it's so. Those of you who may not know what that is, look it up. It's hybrid warfare. It's basically warfare that involves like totally
really
everything.
It's unconventional warfare.
It's unconventional, but it's like it's propaganda, it's fake news, it's bombs, it's
everything.
It's everything, and so like there's a concept out there from the 1970s soccer world called total football, which is sort of like similar, right? Where it's like every person in total football plays every role, right? Yeah, so that so that nothing is uncovered. And everything, and it's a winning strategy.
Right. So in total football, for instance, and Catherine Watt has talked about this over and over again. You've got the Department of Defense, which has absorbed, Health and Human Services. So now Health and Human Services and all of its tentacles, like the CDC and the FDA and the NIH and all that, is now the Department of Defense. So they're acting as if, acting with military precision and under military orders. This is why in the beginning of the COVID operation, the strategies around, the media and your principal and your superintendents of your schools and your local community leaders and your boss were all telling you to do things like don't go to work, don't go to school, wear a mask, because it's total football. Like everybody is playing every different kind of role. So you might have a military person with a military background in the role of like a store manager. Do you know what I mean? Or you might have, so everybody's playing every role. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what hybrid warfare is about. And I want to do a video essay about it. I want to make it really creative and really fun and engage people like I did with war crimes. But I'm working on it. We're going through a lot of stuff right now, and I'm
Right,
going
I
through
know.
some things, and
Yeah.
it's going to take a minute to produce it. But
Well, it
so
also, it also fits in with the idea of the hyper normalization,
right,
where you have, and we've talked about this before, but I'll mention it again, where you have, the same agency propagandizing two different sides of the street. So you'll get the same agency, propagandizing about, say the COVID thing, and getting everybody scared about it and making sure that everybody wears a mask and does their part, right? And then they're also propagandizing the people who are against all that, who
right,
are, and so you'll have influencers and people coming out of that deployment or that particular campaign, who are, pro or against whatever it is that's going on. And it's the same agency writing the scripts for the opposing ideas,
yeah.
right? And so that's something that that's part of all this hybrid warfare as well.
Fifth dimensional warfare is the concept of fifth dimension operations, conceptually based on adding the five-dimensional holistic approach to warfare that uses the three dimensions of land, sea, and aerospace, but it also incorporates the temporal and cyber dimensions of warfare. So a lot of people only recognize warfare as bombs coming from the sky. And so it's a very one or maybe two-dimensional concept of war where you've got, bombs dropping equal people dying. But this is coming from the land, the sea, the cyber. It's coming from all ends. It's a panopticon.
Well,
And so we're in fifth dimensional warfare right now.
and you mentioned temporal. I wonder how that works. I mean, is that like
That's well, when I think of temporal, I think of the temporal lobe
well,
of your brain.
No, I think it refers to time.
Time. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and plus you do have the psychological aspect of it,
Right, and so I think that
okay, yeah, the concept
unless,
of time.
Unless they go into it further, like and describe what the temporal is. I mean, I can only imagine that it has something to do with like rewriting history or getting people to think of history differently.
Right. Well, that's psychological too. That's gaslighting.
Right.
Slaves were always happy.
Right.
That's gaslighting.
Oh, children have always had heart attacks.
That's
Didn't you know
gaslighting.
that? Yeah.
So that's the psychological part of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that the general population really needs to, especially the civilian population, needs to expand their mind into the fact and the truth and the understanding that we are in the midst of these different types of warfare tactics, and whether it's hybrid or asymmetrical or fifth dimensional warfare, they're interchangeable, and they may not be every day.
Right. Exactly. Well, okay, that's a good point.
So,
And and I think also that because the United States was founded the way it was, and because we have been socialized and everything with the idea that the military is a good thing in the United States, and that everybody pretty much worships it, right? Except for maybe the liberals, but even then they'll when they'll get on board when the war
when it benefits them.
when they think that the war is a good idea. And
if it benefits their bottom line, which is corporate interests, which is typically what how liberals have been able to find success is through corporate interests, then
Right.
yeah, they're totally
on board.
They're not necessarily on board with warfare, but they're certainly like do.
Yeah.
They won't say anything because they know their bottom line will be affected.
And this area that we live in, like, it's like all about military, because they've got banners along lining the streets that honor veterans that lived in the community, and there's even like a special parking place next to the disabled parking place for
Strictly
for veterans or
right.
military members, right?
Just for
and then
veterans,
you know, and then throughout the country, and it's like, you know, veterans get preferential treatment when like boarding planes.
Well, eventually,
and,
eventually this idea that like this town has, which is this really like sort of, you know, outdated version of war and keeping the country safe and all that, eventually that is going to phase out as these baby boomers and these older generations die off, because warfare is a way of life now.
Yeah.
Now that warfare is a way of life and we are under a warfare stratagem, like the,
right.
You know, so eventually it's going to die out.
Yeah.
Like, eventually this ridiculous,
I hope so.
like, flag waving bullshit and thank you for your service garbage is going to die out as people realize that hybrid warfare, asymmetrical warfare, and fifth dimensional warfare is a way of life. And as long as the United States still lives under the Defense Production Act, then we are at war.
So I wanted to back up
know?
a second, because the point I was trying to make is I don't know if, I hope that that's the case, but because people are in such a frame of mind of like worshiping the military, and the military is part of everyday life, that people cannot see that the military or the DoD are part of this. Because you keep saying to me, it's like people are not paying attention to this. They don't want to admit that their own country's military are attacking its own citizens.
Yeah, they don't want to admit that, for sure. Even people who are sort of like peace-loving, you know, anti-war types are still in this like horrible place of denialism where it's just like, I've never heard of such a ridiculous thing. How dare you call these terrible vaccines bioweapons, when the DoD has defined them as bioweapons themselves, and they're the ones that deploy the countermeasures.
This is a case
like,
of hiding.
This is like serious denial.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know?
And it's a good case of hiding the obvious, hiding the obvious in plain sight, or hiding it in plain sight. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, hiding what's going on in plain sight. They tell you what's going on these websites. You know, we've talked about it. We've pointed out what websites you can go to. You know, this is all out there, and it's out in the open. It's hidden in the open.
Right, and it's not even so much as a website as it's like, you know, there's patents that are part of our historical chemical and biological warfare, you know, history. Mm-hmm. There's laws that have been passed. Mm-hmm. There's, you know, congressional moves towards giving the DoD and our military more power against the people. Mm-hmm. I mean, this isn't even about like just go to this website and find it. This is more like it's embedded in our law now.
Well, it's not only embedded in the law, and I think that those kinds of things are so dense, people don't know how to like get past that. But I also think that we, you know, again, coming back to what I was saying before, we are so enculturated and so socialized to thinking that the military is, you know, part and parcel of the the experience, the American experience, right? Everybody knows somebody or is in the military, right? If you aren't in the military, you know somebody who is,
right. So I think it's a
was.
So years and years ago, you know, we listened to Roxanne Dunbar Artits, I believe that's her name.
Yeah.
And she said out loud, you know, that the United States was founded as a fiscal military state. So, in other words, founded as a base for the crown, a military base. So we all know what a military base is. So, and you said this out loud, and it completely changed my way. It completely changed my view of the United States. It totally, completely changed and reconfigured the way I view Americans and being an American. That's why when I tell people that we are currently in, you know, at least hybrid, asymmetrical, and fifth dimensional warfare, and I get this blank stare, like, back at me. And yet I'm like, well, of course we are, because we were founded as a fiscal military state. So our entire existence is based on wartime tactics. It's based on a military operation. So of course we're living under military operation and military coercion and military oppression and all that. Of course we are. And people are just like, but we're free. It's like, we've never been free.
No, we haven't.
Like, don't be silly.
Right.
Like, we were founded as a fiscal military state.
Well, I think that falls also into
You
the category of, like, and we saw this in, illustrated in that movie, the Knives Out movie,
Glass Onion.
Glass Onion, yeah, where it's like, and it's illustrated, but I think this is written much larger, in this, or writ large, as they say, that people will believe something if you tell them that. There's no evidence of it, but they'll believe what you tell them, right? And so going back to the idea of being enculturated, right? We've all been told, we've all been raised with this idea of, how the country was founded, what precepts and what ideas were part of that. And they may be correct to some degree, but in a lot of cases, especially when it comes down to constitutional rights, they were written for white wealthy landowners,
right,
and not for anybody else. And over the years, they've kind of loosened things up because they know that they need our cooperation. So as they need cooperation from a given part of the population, they will loosen up the rules and the rights or the guarantees of rights that we already have in the first place. They're just telling us that now they're protected. Well, you fucking assholes, we had those rights before.
We're human beings.
We're human beings, so we
are
are
free. You don't need a piece of paper to tell you that you're free or that you have, human rights protections or anything like that.
So first, they loosen it up and go, oh, well, we're going to need these people who aren't landowners to help us out. So we might want to just like extend, those voting rights to those people, like the non-landowning white men. Okay, and then next thing you know, it's like another group of people. Eventually women got the right to vote,
and not because they felt that women were all that special. It was going back to what you just said, which is that if we don't do this, these women are going to start breaking windows and burning our buildings down.
Right, exactly.
We better do something.
And it's placating.
It's placating.
Right?
Yeah.
And because if you look at the Constitution, and I think it was Naomi Wolf who was pointing this out with the whole ERA thing, and that is that women really are not protected.
Right.
They're not considered humans or anything according to the Constitution.
According to the Constitution.
There is no acknowledgement of women as participants or as individuals.
Right. It clearly says men, and if you want to mince words, of course, people say, well, that term men includes, all human. They just use the term men,
right?
But it's it's,
you know that it'll get used against you if you try to bring it up,
right,
to try to protect yourself as a woman, let's say,
right,
and and the whole fact that the ERA got pushed aside, even when it was ratified by all the states that needed to participate in that ratification. Once it got to that point, it was ready to be put into place, and yet it wasn't. Right. And in the 70s, when it should have, when it was gaining momentum, when things were happening, all of a sudden, instead of pushing for ERA, suddenly out of nowhere, we have Roe v. Wade take place and distract all these activists. Exactly. So all the feminist activists got, especially of the wealthy liberal class, right, got distracted with Roe v. Wade and abortion rights and directed away from the ERA. Right.
The ERA would have been a much more valuable, something to embed into the Constitution.
Correct. And if ERA had been in place, we wouldn't have needed Roe v. Wade.
Exactly.
Because it would have been something that would have come about as part of a constitutional right, as opposed to a ruling from the court.
Right. So what it ties into what we understand to be like the founding nature of Roe v. Wade, which is where sort of Planned Parenthood came out of, right? And of course, Planned Parenthood is really a eugenics program in disguise. So
it came out of the liberal class,
right? And so it just kind of goes back into that bigger overarching understanding of where our country is founded from, and the values that our country was originally founded on, which has nothing to do with freedom and democracy, but more about like military operations and eugenics programs.
Well, and I would say control of the population,
deep control of the human population.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Control of the
We're
population.
We're an experiment.
Right.
This country is
Absolutely.
an experiment.
Yeah, and they've always used that word.
Right.
The experiment of democracy.
Right.
Right.
Not realizing that what it is an experiment in controlling human nature and the human population. Socialist countries that took, the cynical core values that were originally written for white landowning men, such as, the right to vote and freedom and blah, 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 they adopted those values as actual true embedded, processes in their governments and in their constitutions. And so you really do have like socialist countries in some ways that are much more free in the sort of existential sense than the United States has been. We are free to consume. We are free to consume products that most likely will harm us, and we are free to not consume those products that will most likely harm us. That's basically where your freedoms lie, is your freedom to consume and use your purchasing power to go back into programs that will ultimately, over long stretches of time, hurt you in the long run.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
That's not really freedom.
Right. And
that's just corporate, capitalism.
Well, it's industrial capitalism. It's capitalism. But the socialist countries are just as bad about like things like like an industry, right? I mean, those are things that harm people as well. And
unfortunately, when you have, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, just that there's there for a long time there's unregulated pollution and whatnot. It's just that you get more equal pay, right? And so their emphasis is on equality. And and you're not really getting it there per se.
Not
and
really.
And in the United States and more so-called democratic, liberal democratic countries, it's you're getting freedom, which you're not really getting that much of, either. It's like within this this strict idea of what freedom is. Because I mean, if it was really true that this was a country that was founded to provide liberty and freedom and justice for all, then
poor people would be able to fly and go have vacations, go to expensive areas and live a lovely life, as well as rich people.
Right. There
we don't have that.
we would have direct democracy.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And but we've been told this story that the founders thought that direct democracy would be chaos, and they didn't use the word anarchy because that really wasn't used back then. But they thought that it would be democracy for the rabble, and it would turn it over into chaos, and it would be
right. Whereas the rabble, which are considered like the poor or the working class or the underclasses, are actually more organized, more helpful, more like they're more thoughtful about how their imprint on the world will affect other people. It's the wealthy that are the rabble. It's the wealthy that just barrel through and do whatever the fuck they want with no consideration to how their strides towards accumulating more wealth will affect the rest of the world.
Well, that was also
the underclasses that are careful and more responsible with their time and energy and money and each other and all that.
No, that was also kind of illustrated in the Glass Onion movie. Where the main character, the billionaire character, has his own private island, and he's willing to just adopt an energy system supply
I know.
that hasn't been tested, that is like,
know.
you know, even though his own people are saying this is going to blow up people's
Right,
houses
so-
and blow, you know, he's
Yeah,
like willing
I
to just
love-
go,
yeah.
you know, and not only that, but like and then like, you know, he's just like does anything that he wants, right?
Right.
And when somebody says, you know, when you're telling this person that I work for to do something, it's going to affect me, and I already don't have much as it is. And so you're going to basically, through your actions, you know, nothing happens to you because you're so rich, nothing touches you.
Right.
But when you ask somebody or make somebody else do something that will affect them, even though you're paying them off and they'll be fine, I'm going to get screwed.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, well, basically,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, well, and obviously, like, there were so many metaphors and so many, like, the energy source that he created, that this billionaire in this movie created, was obviously, like, the COVID shot, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you mean if you deploy this into the households of everybody in the world, you're basically going to create, like, the Hindenburg,
Right.
where if they sneeze, their house might blow up.
Right.
Where, you know, so that's basically what we're dealing with the COVID shot, is like,
Right.
these people are walking around like little fucking, you know, toxic Hindenburgs,
Right.
you know,
Well,
affecting everyone around them.
Not only that, but he was just the channel. He was the medium for distributing this stuff,
Sure.
right? Because he met somebody at a conference and they handed him this technology,
Sure,
and he's
sure.
like, "Oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Let's do it."
Yeah,
without
so he
really
was
looking
the
into
Elon Musk asshole of, you know, and meanwhile it's really the military
Yeah.
that's using him as a yeah, and I love it was really funny. It was hilarious. But the one thing that turned it around and got all of his lackeys to kind of turn against him was when one of them was brave enough to use the product against him, and it ultimately blew up the Mona Lisa.
It blew up the Mona Lisa.
Yeah,
It burned it. Yeah.
wanna-
So yeah, and so it burned it. But I think what the ultimate thing there is that a rebel, the person who went against him, right? And like you said, she used the thing against him, and I think that's what it comes down to, right?
Right.
It's like it requires that standing up and throwing down, as it were.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And used that technology against him so much to where it blew up his house and
Right.
blew up everything, and mainly just like destroyed him through, like you said, it burned the Mona Lisa. And this is sort of the spoiler alert, you know, he had it set up. It was like totally insured and it had this security thing around it, but because he's the billionaire, and he's all arrogant and everything, he installed an override switch. And so she used that override switch against him.
Right.
So it basically discredited him completely.
Right. So here's something else too about the movie, and then we can move on to warfare and an example of warfare that has recently come up in the media. But I want to say one more thing about the movie, if you don't mind.
No.
You know, the investigator, or the detective,
Right.
played by Daniel Craig, who was incidentally channeling Kevin Spacey, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Especially Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Yeah.
He said, look, you know, billionaire dude actually is
Yeah.
not that intelligent. He's one of the dumbest people you'll ever meet, actually. And I've always thought that about Elon Musk as well. Like, he's just not that bright,
Yeah.
you know, but
He has business smarts.
Maybe, you know, but he likes to Twitter. He's the new tweeter in chief. Like,
Right.
at one point we had Donald Trump that was tweeting day in and day out, and everybody was like loving it. And so Elon Musk has simply replaced Donald Trump as like the guy that tweets, and everybody
Right.
follows him. So anyway, the point is that he's not that bright. The billionaire in the movie isn't that bright. And so even when the girl, who is sort of like the heroine, blew up his glass house and, you know, blew everything up and got everybody to change their mind about him and kind of turn against him, which is a good thing. He's like, it still doesn't matter because I have more power and money than God practically, and I can do whatever I want. So it doesn't even matter that you've done this. And she turns around and looks at him and says, "You idiot. You're going to be known as the guy that created the technology that blew up the Mona Lisa." Okay, so it's not about so much as about taking him down. It was more about like that something so important embedded in our cultural
culture.
history and something so valuable to us that went beyond money. It went beyond money.
Right.
Like, think of the Mona Lisa. Everybody knows what the Mona Lisa is.
Right.
And to blow it up and to destroy it and to create the technology that would destroy it is something far worse than, something really disgusting and horrible, like killing a bunch of people
Right.
or
Well, like he was saying in the
abusing children
Right,
or
right.
whatever.
Yeah,
It's like, so she was basically like, you're going to be known as the guy that killed the thing that you can't even put a value on. That's how valuable it is.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You see? And that's what we have to do somehow, is we have to say to the Department of Defense, we have to say to the proprietors of all of this death and disability and devastation on humankind, you are the people that are going to be known as the ones that took away human will or took away freedom of thought. You gave people an illusion of choice when there wasn't a choice. And that's something far worse than blowing up countries, dropping bombs on buildings, killing a bunch of children. That's something far worse than that, is when you...
Yeah. You destroyed the concept of the United States, even though the reality of the United States, as we talked about before, is that we are not free. We're free within a context, free within boundaries.
Right.
But the idea of the United States is far more powerful than the actual living here.
Oh my God, exactly. Because listen to what you yourself even said when you were watching the movie. In fact, last night you even paused the movie at some point and you were like, having an art history, or not art history, but having an art degree and being an artist and being a painter and being a designer, you were like, what is the big deal about the Mona Lisa? It has never really emotionally moved me. People have all of this concept around it. Is she smiling? Is she sad? Is she beguiling? Is she a maid? Is she royalty? What is this? She's all crooked. What? Why is this painting so... Why has it captured the imagination of everyone? And so you yourself have just described what the illusion of the United States is. Why is it supposed to be so great? Why, and so these people are known as the people that destroyed the illusion or the Mona Lisa or what it represents in people's minds.
Right. So they're destroying the idea of the United States.
Right. Just like this guy, the billionaire, destroyed the idea of the Mona Lisa.
Yeah. And so it's I think that's what it comes down to. It's baseball, apple pie, grandma, Chevrolet, right? The home of the free, the land of the free and the home of the brave. All of those things, all of those conceptual constructs that people turn to, people who live in other countries in the world, they've always admired the United States. Why? I don't know. It's because of the concept of the United States.
Right.
Because a lot of people, when they come here, they realize that the concept of the United States is much different than the actual reality of the United States.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of poverty here.
Absolutely. There's a lot of poverty here.
And people have people in other countries where they're really, especially social democracies, or some of those northern countries where there just isn't that, because, and I don't think it's through philanthropy, and I don't think it's through fairness or a meritocracy or anything that you would embed in your government policy. I simply think it's because the people that run the governments in these countries would be just mortified if their country was seen as degraded and impoverished. Like, it's a pride thing.
Yeah.
So we don't have that here. We don't have that kind of pride in our country the way other countries have pride
I'm
in
thinking
theirs.
of Norway and Sweden and those countries.
Yeah.
Like they had a history of the monarchy, right?
Right.
They had kings. They still, Sweden.
Yeah, they still
you
do.
go to Stockholm and the palace,
The palace is right there.
right there in the middle of town, right?
Yeah.
But there is something that's embedded in the culture that goes far beyond,
Right.
though that historical context of like having a king or a queen, that I think pervades and follows throughout history and throughout the culture, that allows for that country to adopt that sort of way of approaching life, so that the state takes into consideration the benefit and the welfare of the people without like exploiting them. Now,
Right.
It's not 100%.
No.
There's a lot of
No,
problems
no,
with those countries.
Yeah.
And currently, there's a growing fascism that's growing, especially in Sweden. The government that is now in place is literally fascist.
Literally.
Right?
Yeah. In every sense of the word.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and that's where people go, oh, that's the problem with democracy because blah, blah, blah. Well, no, that's the problem with liberal democracy or representative democracy, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem with that, because it denies you the true experience of democratic action or democratic living, where you have both freedom and equality.
Right.
And so that's the problem with representative democracy, period.
Yeah.
And that's what why we're dealing with what we're dealing with now. These what Julie talked about in war crimes, and what Catherine Watt has been talking about is that the people, the liberals love to say, oh, the conservative people and the people who live in flyover country always vote against their own best interests. Well, that's true overall, especially in the political class, right? The people who are the politicians and those in the legislators, they have all basically passed laws that have taken away their own powers,
Right.
to even stop some of this shit that's going on that the military are now imparting on the rest of us.
Right. Yeah. So going back to this concept of these, different kind of dimensional warfares, asymmetric, hybrid, and fifth dimensional, I think it's called.
5-dimensional or 5th-dimensional. Like the fifth dimension?
The fifth dimension operations, or it's also called fifth dimensional warfare. So anyway, these different types of warfare themes that we're literally experiencing, it's everything. So even the most, what you might consider kind of an off story is part of warfare. Mm-hmm. So we want to transition into a specific story that kind of hit home for us on a very personal level, because it involved an anarchist in the Bay Area.
Right. And, I think that what went on with that, you can also point to other actions that have taken place. We can get into those in a minute. But even like through, these military actions are going through like social movement organizations. Mm-hmm. And,
absolutely. So it's the same thing as color revolutions.
Right.
So,
and especially in the social justice sphere, which this particular anarchist was part of. We don't subscribe to that because it has been weaponized. It has been co-opted.
Yeah.
And so, to a degree that, we're all propagandized thinking that a black man had a knee put on his head, and it caused all this disruption in the world.
We're talking about
George Floyd, and then the
Yeah.
whole Black Lives Matter thing, right? That was fake from beginning to end.
That was
too.
a color revolution.
That was a color
tactic.
revolution tactic. Thank you.
So, can you explain what a color revolution is for people who may not know?
Well, I don't know if I can explain it that quickly, that easily, but it's basically it's a fabricated event that triggers a reaction that is so big that it changes, like, say, a government, or it changes a policy, or it changes the attitudes of people towards what caused that problem in the first place.
That's true. You see color revolutions happening often in the Middle East when the United States has a vested interest in Middle Eastern government, or maybe their I want to say product, but that's not right. Their
oh, you mean like
oil,
like an industry, or
their industry. So fabricated color revolutions will take place within those countries,
and the reason
to distract the people and force the people into like a mindset that would ultimately support like the bad guys,
right? So like the Arab Spring, I think you could call a color revolution, but the reason it's called a color revolution is because there's generally a color that's assigned the movement, right? And like, so even the Ukraine underwent a color revolution, and we're talking 20 years ago at this point, which I was kind of appalled that somebody who was allegedly an expert and like covering the current situation in the Ukraine didn't know jack shit about it. And I was schooling her about it, and I was even like kind of vague about it because I couldn't remember everything, but I remember when it happened.
Yeah.
And it was this sort of this very deliberate thing that was going on. Even to the point to where the names of the leaders that were in opposition to each other
were the same name,
practically the same name,
and it made it even more. So the Orange Revolution took place in Ukraine in November of 2004, and then the Purple Revolution took place in Iraq in 2005. So what we're saying in the United States is we're having very local, national, not international, but local, national, small sparks of something that would represent or mimic a color revolution through something called an SMO, which is a social movement organization, which is where you get groups like Black Lives Matter come out of social movement organizations. So,
and go ahead.
So policy in general, in the corporate sector, retail sector, in every sector in the United States has, and especially in your academic sector, has changed dramatically as a result of this tactic, which took place, took place with the George Floyd story. They needed a revolution of some sort in order to implement the policies and structures by which academia operates, by which corporate sector operates, blah, 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 and all this stuff. They needed something to propel it. It was already there. They just needed a reason to hit go.
Right.
They needed a reason to hit the go button. And so that entered George Floyd and that whole story, which was nothing but theater and garbage.
Theater and garbage. And it allowed for the idea of identity politics and what is it? We talked about this before. It's like equity and identity within like a corporate sector.
Sure.
To where it's like it's not about who you are, it's about what you are. And it allows for the corporation to create even more conformity around the idea of identity. Okay.
Right.
That they can then use in a cynical way towards like social justice or social equity and policies around that. It's the equivalent. It's the social equivalent of greenwashing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Which greenwashing is basically saying, oh, we're environmental because we do X, and it's like it amounts to nothing.
Right.
Right.
I think what's really fascinating about, if you're looking at the United States from like a psychological level, and you're looking at and you're taking the pulse of where people are in their minds and where people are in their, worldviews and belief systems, I truly believe that, all of this idea of changing academia and changing corporate policy and changing everything around equity and the rise of the black worker or whatever, all of that could have been implemented without George Floyd, because people are so amenable now in the United States. It's like a corporate memo would come out to a business that said, we are introducing these new board members or these new high-level C-class individuals who will be making, 6 figures a year or more into our corporation, and they all happen to be black. And everybody would be like, okay. Like, you didn't need George Floyd to create that level of equity or create that level of equality. You didn't need to create the theatrics. Because everyone's just so like, okay, well, whatever.
But it goes back to the the asymmetrical or the hybrid warfare that we're talking about, because you're getting because that allowed for the propaganda of white supremacy and of racism that allegedly permeates the United States and the world, and to the point where you're like, decolonize your bookshelf.
Okay, so that's where the military comes in, I guess. So I imagine that there was and then we'll move on to our subject.
Well, it really is a good introduction to where we're going with this.
So I imagine the conversation went something like this. You've got everybody sitting down at a conference table, and you've got, the Department of Defense represented over here. You have the corporate sector represented over here. You've got the media represented over here, and maybe some government blah, blah, blah over here. And so you've got the corporate sector saying to the media, look, we're just going to start incorporating more, black Americans into our C-class infrastructure, and nobody will complain about it because we've already got a very ameliorated, compliant citizenry. Like, we've already got compliant people in the United States that will not fight it. We've already gone down this road. We don't have to push this idea that we're a white supremacist nation down people's throats anymore. Everybody believes it, so it'll be fine. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense is across the table from them going, whoa, whoa, whoa. So we want a piece of this pie. How are we going to benefit from this? And meanwhile, in the corporate sector is fine. Like, fine, okay, fine, DOD. What do you want to do? Well, I know. Let's create this big, brouhaha between the police and George Floyd, and then the CIA is like, hey, wait, that's our idea.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So then you've got this created thing that the Department of Defense will eventually benefit from, because they're going to pull in, military personnel to cover the White House or cover the Capitol building, right? Remember when all the National Guards had, so suddenly you get everybody benefits from this story. Meanwhile, the corporate sector was like, dude, we could have done this through a memo. We literally could have just implemented all of this change and this so-called equity and equality. We literally could have done it through emails and memos.
Right.
But you CIA and you DOD, you're so greedy, you had to be a part of it too, so fine, whatever.
Right. And I think you're seeing a backing away in the corporate world from all
cynical.
This crap, right? No, I agree. No, I knew that all this COVID shit and all this crap, that whole thing with George Floyd and all that crap, that kind of blew up and went away. And that was the whole point of it. It was there as a disruptor for a temporary period of time to distract people from what was going on with, whatever was going on behind the scenes of the whole COVID narrative. Right. So it was happening at the same time. So again, it's that hybrid warfare tactics that we're talking about.
Right.
But the point that I was trying to make, so maybe getting back to what we were going to talk about.
Sure,
so,
yeah.
The other side of that too is that, they have been adopting, anarchist, ideas and tactics and strategies and then turning them back on not only the people who live in the world and the United States, but also the very people who follow those ideas, right? And so, like, we have the whole Antifa versus the Proud Boys bullshit, right? And that's just theater, and you had the black bloc tactics going on in Hong Kong. Was it before COVID or was it around the same time?
Oh, it was right before COVID.
Right. So you had all this black bloc tactics, and if those of you who don't know what that is, you can look it up. But it's basically, it's a tactical means of demonstration to protect the people who are demonstrating, and it was adopted mostly by anarchist.
Who were occupying abandoned spaces.
So it started
in Germany,
it started in the 70s by German anarchist squatters, who were basically like, look, there's all these buildings around that have been destroyed because of the war and other things, and we don't have places to live. We're just going to occupy these things. And so they needed to protect themselves from the police, and they also needed to protect their identity. And so they adopted, by all wearing black, so it's uniform, covering their faces to some degree, even wearing helmets because, they didn't want to be attacked. And so these other, and then eventually other things like, using umbrellas against like water cannons and things like that.
Right, you see a lot of that in France, actually. When the police start throwing cannons at protesters, they'll just put up their umbrella to stop that. So some of these tactics are actually like really useful, and they actually do come from like legitimate spaces and legitimate movements. But of course, it's all been theatrically co-opted,
and compromised.
Compromised.
Right.
We saw that with Hong Kong,
right,
which was nothing but just a U.S. backed like theater bullshit.
Fuckery,
it was probably like, oh, look, let's get these movie guys in here to help us, direct this Hong Kong bullshit.
Well, so the very thing that helps, somebody who's trying to protect their ability to just live through, protest or whatever, to protect their identity, also protects the identity of operatives who may infiltrate. And this is always a problem within, radical movements, right? It doesn't matter if it was, Maoist or anarchist, right? In fact, if anything, the Maoists would try to infiltrate the anarchists to like disrupt them, right? So there was that infighting on the left,
of course.
But then you have disruptors from the state. And I think that we've seen this over and over again. I mean, the whole thing with Judy Berry in the 80s or early 90s, whenever that happened. I think it was the early 90s, where she was driving in her car. She was basically part of an anarchist, eco-anarchist group called Earth First. They were protesting the naval shipyards in Oakland because nuclear materials were being transported through those gates and through that area, right? And they didn't want that. And so they were protesting that, and eventually. Her car, as she was driving with a colleague or a comrade, was blown up. There was a pipe bomb underneath her seat, and they tried to blame her for that very thing, for like blowing herself up, because they basically were saying, "Oh, well, you're transporting, weapons, that were designed to, hurt the state," and that wasn't the case at all. A lot of people thought that the FBI did that, were responsible for that, and they didn't kill her.
No, they didn't.
They didn't kill her. She ended up surviving. She ended up dying of cancer.
Fast cancer.
That kind of came out of nowhere, which is a very CIA thing.
Right. So fast cancer is a term that I coined, and some people are starting to use it throughout social media. But Kirstie Alley recently came down with fast cancer, and a bunch of people who are popular came suddenly within the last year or so came down with fast cancer. And so like one day they were fine, and then like 2 weeks later they were dead of something called cancer, or fast cancer,
or whatever.
So,
Right.
It's like, so she died of fast cancer. Judy Berry did.
Right, exactly. So another anarchist recently died, and just this past week, we're recording this a few days ahead of time, but this past week of February, what was it, like the 9th, I think, or something?
A couple days
ago. Or the 4th. I forget when she...
Yeah.
So we're talking about...
Jen Angel.
So Jen Angel was an anarchist, small business owner, had a bakery called Angel Cakes, We did not subscribe to necessarily her brand of anarchism. There's a lot of
She was a liberal.
Ultimately,
Ultimately.
but at the same time, though, she did adopt, a lot of anarchist ideas. And I want to read something in a moment from Agency, a group that she allegedly co-founded. And Agency is basically sort of a PR group for radical political ideas and anarchist thought. And but she was a social justice warrior, so that she was like pushing the whole masking thing, and I'm sure she was like, right there with the whole Black Lives Matter protests and things like that. We got out of the Bay Area before all that, but we saw some of that shit going on, in the movement. We've talked to our friend Paul Kudnick from Winter Oak about this kind of crap, and how it's been I think this was a deliberate way of co-opting and undermining the radical radical politics and the anarchist movement in particular. And it started a number of years ago, probably in academia. And this sort of like we talked about communitarianism, and communitarianism was something before it became weaponized. So all these things get weaponized and taken over. Did you have some thoughts around this whole thing? You were talking. Well, tell us your thoughts.
So Jen Angel. First of all, the whole thing is just so difficult for me to swallow, even down to her last name. I realize it was her real name, and and I'm familiar with angel cakes, but I just could not swallow the story of how she died. But I understand that it's part of these hybrid warfare tactics. It's part of asymmetrical warfare. When you have these kinds of really traumatic things that happen to people who are sort of labeled as community leaders.
Right. Yeah.
So I know you want to read something.
No, yeah, but keep talking, because I think you had some other ideas around this, but I guess what I'm getting at is that the very thing, and I'll read this, maybe I'll follow up my thoughts after I read this. So this is from an organization called Agency, and I get their emails. They're an anarchist group. It's with a heavy heart that we announce that Oakland Baker, small business owner, social justice activist, and community member, meaning anarchist community, Jen Angel has been medically declared to have lost all brain function and will not regain consciousness. Her official time of death was, As a longtime social movement activist and anarchist, Jen did not believe in state violence, carceral punishment, or incarceration as an effective or just solution to social violence and inequity. The outpouring of support and care for Jen, her family and friends, and values she held dear is a resounding demonstration of the response to harm that Jen believed in. Community members relying on one another, leading with love, centering the needs of the most vulnerable, and not restoring to vengeance and inflicting more harm. Jen believed in a world where everyone can live a dignified and joyful life. And this goes back to what you said a moment ago, when we were talking about, why can't the poor go on vacations? And,
exactly.
Right? So a dignified and joyful life, and worked towards an ecology, sustainable, and deeply participatory society in which all people have access to the things they need. Decisions are made by those most directly affected by them, and all people are free and equal. And then further down, per Jen's wishes. Okay, no, that's another thing.
Further down, it's regarding perps, right?
Regarding the if the Oakland Police Department does make an arrest in this case, the family is committed to pursuing all available alternatives to traditional prosecution, such as restorative justice, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Jen's family and close friends ask that the media respect this request and carry forward the story of her life with celebration and clarity about the world she aimed to build. Jen's family and friends ask that stories referencing Jen's life do not use her legacy of care and community to further inflame narratives of fear, hatred, and vengeance. We do not support putting public resources into policing, incarceration, or other state violence that perpetrates the cycle of violence that resulted in this tragedy. I'm getting my best W on. Tragedy. Anyway, I can't even say it now. Tragedy. We wish for Jen's legacy to be one of deep commitment to safety and dignity for everyone. Okay. So the way she died was horrific.
Pretty horrific.
And we believe that the very thing that killed her is the very thing she's talking about, state violence.
State violence.
As we were talking about, these operatives that have now infiltrated so many aspects of life, and especially the radical communities and anarchists. We believe that she was killed by the very thing that she stood against.
The state killed her.
The state killed her, yet they were disguised as the people that she supported.
Right.
Poor communities and marginalized communities. So the state was disguising itself as a marginalized community member and attacking her.
How about this? This will really appeal to our right-wing conservative, pro-patriotic, anti-Hillary, which we are anti-Hillary as well, people. Jen Angel's death is to Seth Rich's death as well.
Yeah.
The state killed Seth Rich, even if we assume he was even a real person, which I have my doubts. But she, so the story goes that she was at a Wells Fargo on Webster in Oakland, California. Mm-hmm. And I'm familiar with that area, that area very well. I used to bank there at that very Wells Fargo. And that she was robbed, but the people who robbed her didn't take anything out of her car, which is odd. They didn't take anything of value out of her car. And there's no real indication what the alleged robbers took. Did you need to read something else?
No, keep talking
because you're holding something like you really want to read something.
Well, so I will talk about it because I want it as an illustration, so I want to make a point. So keep talking. I'm not trying to disrupt you.
No. It's just that I don't want to hurry through this.
No, go through it.
So if you have something to say.
No, I don't have that point yet.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the point is that they didn't take the thing that we don't know what they took. It's really unclear in all of whether it's you're reading a New York Times article about it, which they've covered it, or whether you're reading a local San Francisco Bay Area coverage about it, whether you're reading tweets. Nobody is telling you what was actually taken. I just assumed it was money.
Right.
She ran a small business, and so maybe she went to the bank to get some cash, and she had her cash on her.
And that's the problem with a lot of media these days is they write things in ways that makes you think something.
Right.
And they didn't really even say it in the first place. My impression was that the alleged perps, the perpetrators, took money from her, and what was written, what I read was that she chased after them, and then somehow got caught up in their car door.
So that's what I was getting at. Because the point is that we didn't know what they took, but it was enough for her to respond in a way that was against her nature. Mm-hmm. Okay.
It went against what I just read in that statement.
So as a social justice activist who wanted to make sure that we changed the way we prosecute or punish perpetrators, she is a non-violent, non-aggressive person. So for her to be portrayed as somebody that would go chasing after someone is against her nature.
Right. And I've picked up on that too.
Okay, so that was a lie.
That was a lie.
That was a lie. If that is true, that she really is this person that all of her friends and family and cohorts and comrades and all that believe she was, which is a non-violent pacifist, why would she go chasing after anyone? Okay, so that right there made me go, wait a minute, this doesn't pass the sniff test. at all. Like,
Right.
it doesn't pass the sniff test. So then she somehow got caught in their car, somehow, and was dragged until dead, basically,
Right. Well,
until she lost brain function.
Right. So she was
Right.
taken
And
to
then
the...
she was put into a medically induced coma to try to see if her brain function would come back, and it never did, so they pronounced her dead. This is not an action that comes... This is not what individuals and what civilians do to each other. These are the actions of the state.
Mm-hmm.
These are wartime tactics when you're in the middle of warfare.
Right.
This was a militarized deployment of outright murder against an individual in order to spark a color revolution or a concept around our justice system.
Well, yeah, a
Okay.
concept. That's a great way of putting it. And
Okay.
something that I said to you was, people who are robbing you, or people who are stealing or doing
Yeah.
something like that, don't, even murderers don't do this. They don't murder people this way. They don't respond this way. They would not have dragged her. They would have beat her up and thrown her out. Right? Not dragged her around. That, I said, it sounds like a military action.
Yes,
When
exactly.
you first told me about it.
Yeah, it's a military action to drag someone like that.
So something then that came up, as we were talking about this, that restorative justice came up in that press release from agency, and it also was something that you mentioned to me as well. And we were talking yesterday by text because I was out taking care of an errand, and I said, restorative justice is actually a good thing, but once again, it's being weaponized. It's something that's being weaponized and held up as a positive alternative, even in extreme situations, like somebody getting murdered or somebody getting killed through this violent act, this
Right.
extremely violent act.
Right.
But we both know this is a pivot to let us know that there is no real justice system, and that we're either going to all get half loaves, which we
Right.
always talk about Obama saying that, right?
Obama said
getting your
half-loaf.
half loaves from the state, or we're basically on our own.
Right.
And I was also thinking that it was something that was being lifted up to piss off the conservative
Of course.
contingency of the
of
United States,
course.
because it's a deliberate way of thumbing one's nose, or a concept's nose, into a part of the society that believes in the kind of justice system that we have now.
Right.
And I don't believe in that form of justice, because I don't think it exists. First of all, it never exists for the poor and the marginalized. It is something that is done to those communities. So I'm opposed to the way that crime and justice and punishment is done in the United States. But I knew that this would deliberately raise the hackles of the conservative part of the country.
And they fell for the bait so quickly. They were like,
Right.
"So, Little Miss Anarchist, so you're into restorative justice, huh? How's that working out for you?"
How's that working out for you?
It
Exactly.
totally bit you in the ass, didn't it? I mean, you should see some of the horrible tweets coming from the conservative side, not realizing that it was actually the state that killed the woman.
Right.
That it was probably CIA operatives or FBI agents or operatives that killed the woman. Literally.
Or I even said IDF, right?
Right. Or probably the IDF, because they're all over the United States now.
Right.
So, and really predominant in Florida. Thank you, DeSantis, for that. So for those of you who love DeSantis so much right now, you should
Right.
be careful about what you wish for. But so the whole story around Jen Angel and the way she was killed got me to thinking about, wait a minute. The last time I heard about somebody who was dragged and beaten and killed in such a horrific way, they made a movie out of it. It's called Boys Don't Cry.
Right.
And it sparked a movement of, pro-trans, or, the safety of trans people, or, gay, the safety of the LGBTQIA movement and all this stuff. It was the story of Brandon Tina in Nebraska, I believe, who was really Tina Brandon. Like, her name was Tina Brandon, but she...
Let's go, Brandon.
But she cut, I know, right? But she cut her hair short and wore boys' clothes and had everybody believe that she was a boy. And so she was, playing pool with the guys and drinking beer and dating women. And when it was discovered that she was actually a girl pretending to be a boy, it made everybody really angry. And so she was violently raped and then dragged, on the... I think was how the story went, dragged along and left for dead and died. And so thus began like a sort of a revolution, a movement towards, inclusion and safety of the trans community. But a year before that, another story had come about when a gay boy, Matthew Shepard, was going to school at the University of Wyoming.
In Laramie, I think, yeah.
Happened to go into a bar, and a couple of local guys realized that he was gay, so they, again, dragged him, at the back of their truck. They beat him up, dragged him at the back of their truck, and hung him on the fence.
Right.
And so he died a violent death. So what's with the dragging?
Well, it even goes
the
back.
Dragging
right.
is...
It goes back even further to the civil rights era,
right?
Where there was an incident where a young black man was dragged to his death as well.
Exactly.
And I don't have the details on that. I can't remember it, but I do remember that incident, right?
Right.
And so this is a form of death that is degrading.
Yeah.
It is
it's torture.
It's torture. But also, if you think about it, like, if the person was dead and that was done to their body, that's also a desecration of a body. Right? So it's a desecration of a person's life.
Right.
While torturing and killing them.
Right.
Right.
So it's one of the most dragging. So this chick, when they talked about how she was dragged, when Jen Angel was dragged by the car, I was like, dragging. That's a military move. That's a state-backed move.
Right.
That's a level of violence that goes into that malevolence that not even your common criminal, that's a mob-like tactic.
Yeah.
Your common criminals don't drag.
Right.
They just shoot you in the head.
And those other incidents that we were talking about with Tina Brandon and
Matthew
Shepard, we believe that those also were perpetrated not by people or some hayseeds,
sure,
in the backcountry. That this was actually blamed on that type of person in order to blame that type of person.
Right, in order to create division.
Exactly, thank you.
People who live in Wyoming that drive trucks and, are of a certain demographic, they're all like, and they're all anti-gay or racist,
and they may
whatever.
not be,
and they're not.
Well, they might be anti-gay, but it's just
they're not violent.
Exactly. That level of violence isn't going to exist, right?
No.
So it's a way of perpetrating a crime, lifting up a movement that will undermine social cohesion,
right?
And blaming people for that act that probably are not responsible. They may possess those feelings and ideas around like homosexuality or transgender people, but they're not going to act out in that way because that's just not the way people actually behave. But it's believable enough, and I think that this is what is constant in all of the things that we've been talking about. It is a thing that is believable enough for people to go along with it and adopt it into their ideology, into their mindset, and into their belief system.
Right.
And that's why COVID happened. That's why we're undergoing all this shit, because people believed what was being told to them. And going back to the movie we were talking about, people believed the billionaire because he told them what they wanted to believe.
Right. So, unlike the story of Matthew Shepard and Brandon Tina, where the individuals who allegedly were accused of doing the violent act went to prison and had to don the orange jumpsuits and went through the trial and all this, and were completely psychologically bamboozled into believing that they did something which they probably didn't do. They were simply accused of it and then made to believe, well, you've always had a thing against gay people, right?
Yeah.
Well, sure. And you've always had violent tendencies, right? Remember that time when you beat up your little sister? That kind of thing.
Kind of shit.
And make them believe that they did this horrible, horrible denigrating act, right? That was really a military act or a state-backed act, right?
Right.
This level of violence. So unlike that story, the Jen Angel story is different somehow. The so-called perpetrators, which I can almost guarantee you that they will find innocent individuals and set them up to be front and center. Oh, look, we found the bad guys who stole from her and dragged her along and ultimately killed her. We found them, these violent perpetrators, but we're going to honor the wishes of her legacy and her family and her cohorts and comrades and the entire movement, social justice movement, and we are going to introduce to the public something called restorative justice.
And so
unlike those two other stories from the 90s,
Right.
Brandon Teena and Matthew Shepard, this one's going to have a very different ending.
Right. And so I want to jump ahead to the criticisms of restorative justice, and let's see, I found it here. The criticism, yeah. So and there's a bunch here, but I'll get in. I'll just read this. Restorative justice erodes legal rights. Restorative justice results in net widening. Restorative justice trivializes crime. So this is what they're trying to play into is the criticisms of restorative justice to basically make a mockery of it in front of the country, but at the same time allowing for this to be a pivot. Like we're now going to adopt restorative justice as a policy, but they're not going to adopt restorative justice as a policy in the way that it has been traditionally done in the past. It's going to be in a way that will hurt everybody involved, right? So some people say that it leaves power imbalances, vigilantism, which, again, that might happen.
Oh yeah,
right?
They're trying to stoke vigilantism in the civilian population. Right. They really are. Now, this is a classic tactic by the military. Right?
Now, one of the criticisms that I personally have with it is they mentioned here in this. I'm looking at Wikipedia, but whatever. Gregory Shank and Paul Takachi see restorative justice as an incomplete model that fails to fix the fundamental structural inequalities that make certain people more likely to be offenders than others. Right? We see that here in our own community.
Right.
They and others question the structure of society and the fairness of institutional systems at their very core, pushing for addressing the root causes of many one-on-one offenses, as well as for creating a socioeconomic system that will be more conducive to harmonious, healthy living in general, which is where Jen Angel stands, not in her criticism of restorative justice, but her criticism of our current society and state and the state,
right,
and the way it treats people and the violence that is perpetrated on society by the state.
Right.
This stands right there, square in that thing. And as anarchists ourselves, I feel that this falls within the ideas of anarchist thought and parallels the kinds of I don't want to say justice, but the way that traditional societies have handled issues like violence or perpetrating some sort of crime, if you will, for lack of a better word, against another person. Traditional societies have found ways of working around this that don't involve laws, that don't involve a centralized state, but it happens within their own society, and they've worked these things out, and this parallels that. In fact, the whole idea of restorative justice comes from traditional societies like Native American societies, and also what was mentioned here, the Maori of New Zealand. Okay.
Yep.
So this whole thing is designed to just fuck with your head.
Yeah. So we saw examples of, it's not really restorative justice, but we saw an introduction into this idea about restorative justice when in 2020, 2021, suddenly people were walking into Walgreens and shoe stores and Targets and just taking everything that they could possibly take, filling up their bags and walking out.
And this was in the state of California.
This is actually all over the country,
Oh,
but
was it? Okay.
definitely, you definitely saw a lot of it specifically in San Francisco. And you had, consumers, civilians going, why isn't security doing anything about this? And finally it was discovered that California law states that, an individual can take $900 worth of product and not be charged with theft, not
Right.
be charged with anything. So this concept of being able to do something which had traditionally been, which we've all grown up, don't steal, don't steal that candy from the candy jar, don't steal that pack of underwear from, Target or whatever and
yeah.
slip it into your bag. Like all these things that we grew up to understand, that it's wrong to steal.
That enculturation.
Right.
Yeah.
We were enculturated into that. Suddenly is different now. It's only wrong to steal if it's over $900,
Right.
according to certain states and,
Right.
and their restorative justice system. So we were slowly introduced into this idea that the justice system is different.
Is being eroded.
Or it's different now. So that is something that we're going to want to pay attention to, I think, with this Jen Angel story. I'm hoping that they do find the actors who will portray the perpetrators so that we can see this play out, so that you and I can be like, told you so. They may never find them because they may find that the concept of restorative justice
Isn't polling well.
Isn't polling well, exactly, because that's what this is really all about. But what I think it does represent, which is something that I've always been driving home now ever since I made war crimes a month ago or on January 1st, which is that we are living in a wartime scenario. We are the victims of war. All of this interdimensional war, hybrid warfare, fifth dimensional warfare, asymmetric warfare. And so we have to look at this Jen Angel story as a military action for a reason. Another thing that I want to touch on, and unfortunately this will creep us into that place that we are not, which is reactionary. But I'll go ahead and creep into that area, is something you said, where it could promote or inspire vigilante justice. When you start having vigilante justice because perpetrators aren't getting punished in the way that our justice system has traditionally punished them for committing crimes, and you start getting individuals, picking up their guns or sort of throwing punches or confronting the perpetrators themselves outside of the justice system, you might have little tiny eruptions of violence. It doesn't take much. It could literally take a handful of people holding Trump signs in order to bring in 25,000 National Guards.
Right.
You see how this could blow up in your face?
Yeah.
You don't really have to do anything in order to inspire a military coup against your freedom. Like, you don't really have to do anything, as we witnessed on January 6th. A bunch of theater, things that were pre-recorded and then streamed as if they were live streaming. Actors who had been placed in ridiculous outfits.
Right.
Congressional representatives and people in political positions of power screaming about insurrectionists when it wasn't any such thing.
Right.
And then you had a whole contingent of innocent people that thought that they were going to see their favorite person in the world, Donald Trump, who had tweeted out the day before, "Don't go, people, because I'm not going. I'm not going to be there."
Right.
But you had certain individuals from the FBI planted within the movement of your Trump-loving people saying, no, we're going to go anyway, and we're going to celebrate the man, and he doesn't need to be there for us to celebrate him.
Right.
And they were holding up innocent signs, and then they were swept up into this theatrical bullshit, okay, which then disappeared people into the lack of justice system. Apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, there are certain individuals, innocent people, who are still held after over 2 years, still held without a trial, without even charges.
Without any charges.
Disappeared into black sites or wherever the fuck, or in jails, right? And then you had 25,000 National Guards come at the inauguration of National Guardsmen come at the inauguration of Biden.
Right, in the same year, yeah.
Right, because they assumed that there was going to be violence because of the so-called insurrection.
Right.
It doesn't take much to get to that point. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Jen Angel story is a pivot, and it's a big one.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And people need to pay attention to what it means as we pivot away from, more and more from being a free society or a constitutionally protected society and into a military controlled society. We already know that the military deployed bioweapons onto the general population, onto Americans. We already know that they got away with murdering Americans, the military. So what makes you think that they won't, deploy the National Guard in your local communities because you're pro-restorative justice?
Or you're against it, or whatever the case may be.
So they could say, wait a minute, so you're pro-restorative justice, meaning that you want to do away with the traditional justice system. Well, we better get the National Guard in there.
Mm-hmm. Right, I see what you're saying.
Because chaos will come.
Right.
Because vigilantism will come.
Right.
Like, you don't even have to do it.
Right.
You don't even have to do vigilantism to inspire the National Guard to come in.
Right, and that follows the theme of what we've been saying. It's like, it doesn't matter what actually happens, as long as you say it happened.
Yeah.
It can cause other actions to take place.
Right.
So as long as you convince people that something happened, you can justify the actions that you then take, or the state takes, against the people who are being accused of whatever action was said to happen in the first place.
Right. So the story of the peaceful social justice activist who ran a bakery, being dragged through the street by so-called perpetrators who allegedly stole something from her, and then she went against her nature to chase after them. That's not her nature.
Right.
She was like a typical Bay Area, like super pacifist. I imagine that if it really did happen, this is how oh my God, I was robbed, right? Like, somebody on the bus came onto the San Francisco Muni bus when I was on my way to a doctor's appointment many, many years ago, and pickpocketed me. And I didn't even realize I'd been pickpocketed. And so and finally it was some Chinese lady that was hitting me upside the head.
Whoa.
Sorry. She was like, "You've just been pickpocketed." Okay. So she was like, "You stupid lady, you've just been pickpocketed." So I casually got up and I asked the bus driver to stop the bus, and I casually walked off the bus, and the guy was standing there holding my wallet, and I said, "Can I have my wallet back?" And he's like, "Okay, here you go." And that was it. That was the extent of me so-called confronting my robber.
Right.
I didn't, chase after him, and, because I'm a pacifist, right?
Yeah. You're not going to...
And also, when I was in New Orleans, right before Katrina, I had my debit card stolen by a cashier at a local Walgreens.
I remember the story, yeah.
Yeah, I was on my way to the airport, I had, a few hours to catch my flight. Thank goodness I didn't miss my flight. But I realized that a whole bunch of money had been charged on my debit card without my permission. And I realized it came from Walgreens. So I went back to the Walgreens and I said, do you guys, first of all, do you have my debit card? And they're like, yes, we do. We have it in the back here. They had my debit card. And then I said, and now there's a bunch of charges on there. I'm not, hundreds of dollars worth of charges. I'm not exactly sure what went on. And it turns out it was an employee. One of the employees had charged like a bunch of stuff on my debit card. And so they brought in the store detective, they brought in the police, they brought in the employee, and myself and the store detective, the store manager, and the police were in the back of the Walgreens in the office about ready to make an arrest. And they refunded all of my money right in front of me. They just did reverse charges and I got the money back right away. Ironically, it was a Wells Fargo account that I had. And then the detective turns to me and says, so we're going to file charges. And I said, why? Well, because he stole from you and he committed a crime. And I said, did you happen to see what he bought? What he bought
with that money?
With that money, he bought formula. He bought diapers. He bought stuff for children. There was like one electronic in there.
Yeah.
And I was like, are you kidding me? I am not going to file charges against this kid. It's not my fault that he doesn't have enough money to buy diapers for whoever. Maybe it's a family member or maybe it's his own kids. And the detective turned around and looked at the kid and goes, wow, it's your lucky day. These Californians, man, they don't want you to go to jail. And the cops were like, well, if she's not going to press charges against him, can we go? And I was like, yes. And the kid was just like, thanks. And he split. Right. He took off. And the store manager was like, well, obviously he's fired. And I was like, well, obviously, but at least he's not going to jail.
Right.
Right. So,
yeah.
So that's the reality of your situation. Like that's, so for her to rush after them and, be like, give me my whatever bat, that just it did not pass the snip test.
No, it did not.
It did not compute. And she was killed by the state.
Right. And if she did actually, react in that way, which is kind of natural, I think. She still, it still doesn't make sense that she would have been dragged to her ultimate death, right?
Right, like caught in the car.
Yeah. The way that was described
was
like that description just sounded so just like bullshit, hokum, made up crap.
Yeah, it's totally,
like I don't believe that.
Yeah, I don't believe it either. So, so I think that we need to pay attention to this, and.
Yeah, I mean,
keep an eye on what this restorative justice theme or concept is, how well it's going to poll, and it may not. So this whole thing may just.
And let me just say that
disappear.
There's nothing wrong with restorative justice. It's been used since the 90s, and especially in smaller communities, and especially in like the Native American communities, like on the reservations. And it's actually a good thing. The problem, there's some problems with it, and it's harder to use within the context of a broader society like the United States and the system that's already existing. It's sort of like, what they've been trying to do is using it as an amendment to the existing justice system to try to reform people. But, as we all know, the justice system is not about reforming. It's about exploitation and about punishment and degradation. And
and it's also, we are allowed to have slaves, modern day slavery, through the prison system.
Right, exactly.
So,
which is what I was kind of getting at, right? So, it flies in the face of what the people who are in power really want. So what better way to get rid of something than to lift it up and make it look ridiculous?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the folks out there who are saying she's getting what she deserved and this restorative justice is bullshit are not seeing the big picture.
No, they're not.
Because what is being lifted up and ultimately going to be dismissed is not restorative justice. It's going to be the removal of more of your rights.
Right. It's going to be martial law. It's going to be an excuse for martial law and a militarized deployment of justice right onto your local streets.
Right. Exactly.
So
okay. Well, that's
the end.
That's the end. Yeah. So I know we're laughing about this. We're not laughing about this situation. I think that it was pretty horrific.
Yeah.
And despite our differences within the anarchist movement, I think that this is a pretty awful thing, and I feel very bad for her family and friends and her comrades, who we've mixed with and rubbed elbows with at book fairs and shit.
Yeah, I mean they're all very. It's more about in our opinion, especially in the Bay Area, I think it's more about academic types that have philosophical concepts, and so they've written books or printed literature to just kind of espouse those concepts, whereas maybe they work in tech or what I mean, they're not, or they fix bicycles, they're not really these
maybe they're in the middle class,
they're not,
but there are people out there who are living those sort of alternative lifestyles even in the Bay Area where it's really expensive and it's hard to do. So power to them. But anyway, well, I hope you get something out of this. I hope you go and research restorative justice and try to understand it better.
Yeah.
And look into this story more and think about these things in more three-dimensional ways. As well as these other stories too. This idea that the military is doing its job and is right there for you because they're shooting down weather balloons that are that are allegedly Chinese spy balloons, or they're shooting down UFOs.
They want you to look up instead of looking on the ground.
Right.
They want you to forget about the dead bodies and your family members and friends that have become permanently changed or disabled or even dead as a result of imbibing a countermeasure.
Yep. Okay.
Well, they deployed.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, we will talk to you again next time.
Thank you.
On Footnote.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.